Pastor Wills asked me to read from Luke 10, verses 38 to 42. Now, as they went on their way, he entered a certain village where a woman named Martha welcomed him. She had a sister named Mary, who sat at Jesus' feet and listened to what he was saying. But Martha was distracted by her many tasks, so she came to him and asked, "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her then to help me." But the Lord answered her, "Martha, Martha, you are worried and distracted by many things, but few things are needed, indeed only one. Mary has chosen the better part, which will not be taken away from her." Pastor Will.
Great, thanks, Laura. So my theme this summer is traveling vicariously. I initially called it Travel Summer. Not all of us get to travel. Some of us have to travel vicariously or through the experiences of other people. So the idea is that there are places that we visit that become part of our story. There are places that we visit because of the story that's happening there. And also there are times where we are thinking about a place, yearning for a place that we can't get to, but there's a story there that we are a part of or want to be a part of. So this week, as I was contemplating a couple of the stories, a couple of the places on my mind, I was thinking about my sister in Ottawa, and it hit me as I was thinking that, you know, this happens to a lot of us. I've talked to many of you who've been called to travel to visit a sick or a dying or a grieving family, a sick or dying loved one. And these aren't trips that we plan. We don't budget for them. We don't emotionally budget for them. We're not ready for them when they happen. And so we aren't in the space. We don't bring our best selves sometimes into those places. And that's an important kind of travel in our life that happens more often than we want it to. And so I thought, well, that would be quite fitting. And then I looked at some of the passages that might fit for this Sunday. If you're following along in the Rejoice devotional, then you'll see this passage probably came up this week. And I read it, and I thought, well, that kind of fits. In our family, Karen, my sister who's in the hospital, is probably the Mary in a family of Marthas. And I thought, well, then I know the passage we're going to look at. And I'm not going to spend too much time talking about my own family, partly because my parents are visiting. You can chat with them afterwards. But also because these are your stories too. In our minds, we sometimes understand a natural course of events that should happen the way that we plan. The oldest should go first. The people who are most ready to go should be the next ones to go. But it doesn't work that way. What happens if the organized one goes first? Then who's going to plan everything? Who's going to take care of the money stuff? Who's going to organize the funeral? The organized one was supposed to do that, but they went first. What happens if the compassionate one goes first? The one who hears sympathetically, the person who's able to accept the barrage of insults and complaints for other people and somehow bring peace and harmony. If that person goes first, then the family meetings become a lot more chaotic. What happens if the black sheep goes first? Then all of the thoughts and all of the anger and resentment, all of the decisions to include or exclude, all of those memories come back. as you're gathering, as you're planning, as you're organizing the funeral, as you're making decisions about health care, all of those regrets come back. The natural course of events that we think should happen rarely does happen. And so in this story that we find these two very different personalities. And so we can try to analyze these two particular people. But I'd like to invite you to think about the Marys and the Marthas in your own life. And I don't think you need too much prodding to do that. This is a surprisingly applicable story. There are a lot of stories in the Bible that we just can't grasp. Even the farmer who sows seeds, fewer and fewer of us do that. Stories of floods and disasters, of interacting with kings and soldiers, we can find parallels, but they're so different. Now we have this story of two family members arguing about chores. I think all of us can relate with that. Now, the typical reading of this story. The typical reading is, on the surface we see that Jesus is visiting these two sisters, and Martha is in the kitchen. She's distracted with many tasks. You've been to people's homes where somebody is running around in the kitchen. Is the food ready? Are the drinks ready? Is the table cleared? Oh, you came before we thought you would, so the house isn't clean. I'm just going to clean while you sit. You've been to houses like that before, and sometimes it makes you feel good. Oh, they value me. They want to have a clean house with good food. Sometimes I don't care about the mess. I'm here to talk to you. I'm here to eat with you. It's fine. Leave the newspapers on the table. It's fine. Don't worry about the cat hair. We have cats too. Right? We've been in that place with Jesus. Where someone is preparing to host you, but they're so focused on hosting you well that they never actually allow themselves to host you. And so we can identify with all of the characters in this story. Now, the typical reading is that Martha values the housework too highly, and Mary is listening to Jesus, and all of us should be like Mary and listen to Jesus. Now, some of us might take this as permission. Next time we're asked to clean up before a guest is coming. Right? We might say, oh, what are you talking about, Mom? Jesus says we don't need to worry about that. Well, then your mom will say, in this particular instance, you got to listen to me, not Jesus, right? It's a tricky spot because we want to be good hosts, but this story is kind of pushing in a different direction. The typical reading exalts worship over work. And I mentioned in the past few sermons that sometimes in the history of the church, people have been elevated. Priests, monks, nuns, they've been elevated and treated more specially, but then also expected to live out more of the Bible. So then in that kind of a church setting, then we can say, well, we have a congregation full of Marthas, but the pastor can be the Mary, the song leader, the worship leader, the deacons, they can be the Marys, the rest of us can be Marthas. But that doesn't really work either in a Mennonite context, because our understanding of the Bible and of Jesus' teachings, we want to integrate work and worship. We want our values to be displayed Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, just as well as they are Sunday morning, 10:30 to 11:30. That's important to us. I know it's important to you because I've heard that in your conversations. These are supposed to be the same. So then in this story, we're sort of presented with a bit of a different argument. But also, if we compare within the context of this story, the context being the story that comes before and the story that comes after. In the story before, and if you're following along in your Bibles in Luke chapter 10, then you can check it for yourselves. But the story that's before is the Good Samaritan. And I've talked before about how I think the Good Samaritan is ultimately a hospitality story. That the Samaritan man in the story, even though he doesn't live in that area, he welcomes the injured man better than any of the locals do. So this is a story about hospitality over worship. If you'll remember the story of the Good Samaritan, there's a man who's been injured as the victim of a robbery, and a priest walks by, ignores the injured man. A scribe walks by, ignores the injured man. But a foreigner, a stranger, a Samaritan who is distrusted and reviled by the Jews, he's the one who stops. He's the one who bandages the wounds of this man. He's the one who makes sure that he has access to the medical care he needs. So in the Good Samaritan, we could say that hospitality is valued over worship. In that story, the Good Samaritan is the Martha. He's taking care. He's getting food. He's making sure that the hospital bill is paid. And the priests and the scribes, they are the Marys. They are the ones who ask spiritual questions. They are the ones who sit and learn. So then, to just elevate worship over work would be inconsistent with the Good Samaritan story. And the story that comes next is Jesus teaching the disciples about prayer. He teaches the Lord's Prayer, which is a little bit different in Luke. Most of us, when we pray the Lord's Prayer, we use the Matthew version. But the story around it that Jesus insists there is that when we pray persistently. This is what my family is doing. We are praying persistently for my sister's recovery. Many of you, in your times of crisis in hospital rooms and in funeral homes, you pray persistently. Now, in this story, the Mary and the Martha story, Martha is asking persistently, Jesus, my sister should be working, should be helping me. So there needs to be some kind of consistent thread through these stories. Now, in this story, we also sort of look at and assume a kind of a timeline of eroding patience. Martha is working. She's scrambling. We're guessing here. She's getting the food ready. She's making sure that the table is going to be set. She's getting all of the things. But where's her heart at? And some of you have been in this situation where you are working, you're concentrating, you're focusing, you want something to be done right, and every now and then you get little reminders that somebody else who could or should be a part of that work isn't with you. And so it feels like on the surface reading there's just this kind of gradual increase until finally Martha has had enough. When she hits the tipping point, then she goes to tell Jesus. But I wondered as I was reading through the story this week, what if there was an event? What if Mary said something that Martha heard? What if Martha just overheard or walked into the room and saw something that just set her off? Well, what was it? What did Mary do wrong? Now, just looking at the story, we can't see that. We have to speculate. And sometimes we feel like, well, we probably shouldn't play guessing games. We'll just take the lesson from the story. But this morning I want us to do that together. We're going to look into this story. Now, we don't need to know ancient Middle Eastern, Palestinian, Israeli culture. We don't need to know those things because we're thinking of a Bible story, but we're thinking of our own stories. Sure, this is a story of a family from 2,000 years ago. But in your minds, in my mind, this story triggers thoughts of families today. Families within living memory. So if I were to just ask out loud, I won't do this, I've learned my lesson a few times. If I were to ask out loud what you think Mary did wrong that set Martha off, then based on your Martha experiences, you might have a lot to say. Right? Maybe Martha gave Mary specific instructions about what to clean up and she didn't do any of that. I remember when I was teaching a Sunday school class in Korea, I had some questions ready, and then that morning as I was getting things ready, I thought of a few more ideas I wanted to explain. So then in the class, I said, just to contextualize when this had happened, I said, this morning as I was ironing my shirt, I was thinking of this point. None of them heard the point that I made. All of them, especially the women, heard me say, when I was ironing my shirt. Apparently, men don't iron their own shirts in Korea, despite the insistence of their wives. So I somehow, in that situation, picked the side of an argument I didn't know was happening. I don't want to do that this morning, because I know some of them may be just kind of hiding below the surface. But I hope that I can inspire in some of your minds what some of these problems might be, because I think it lines up with some of the problems that you've experienced within your families. So I'm going to go through some speculation that came to my mind. And in the process, I hope that maybe I can get you to think of what does the Mary in your life do wrong? What does the Martha in your life get angry about? And where does Jesus fit into this? How does Jesus intervene? So I was thinking of a couple of things. What if Mary set out the wrong dishes? What if Mary's just, it's a meal, that's fine, we'll use these dishes. No, Mary, this is Jesus, we're setting out the good dishes. This is the kind of thing that happens when guests come. Maybe there's just a protocol. When you invite somebody in, you give them a glass of water. Mary's just so excited to see Jesus, she doesn't even offer him water. And Jesus is already telling him a story. And Martha looks in the room, and there's no water. You didn't give the guest water? All of these things, Mary could be absent-minded. This could be a part of a pattern, but I think you know sort of way the direction this could be going. Maybe Martha was just upset that Mary was just sitting there. Regardless of the conversation, maybe Martha's busyness was stressful, especially because Mary was doing nothing. And Martha's ragged on Mary for years about being lazy, and now we have a guest, a special guest, and you're being lazy now? So what does Jesus say? Well, Jesus doesn't defend the actual incident, but I think Jesus does a good job of getting at what's going on behind the scenes. Sometimes people's inactivity, what looks like laziness, might actually be a kind of anxiety. And some people have a natural ambition, whether it's in the kitchen or in the garden or the field. Some people have a natural ambition in the workplace, and some people's minds don't work that way. So Jesus asking Martha about priorities is a way of saying, listen, Mary has a priority here. It's not the same as yours. But Mary is following her priority, and that's a good thing. Maybe Mary dared to laugh. Maybe Mary was having fun, laughing with Jesus. Jesus tells jokes. We see them every now and then. Sometimes we have to kind of use a little bit of critical analysis to make it a joke in present times. But maybe Jesus was joking and Mary was laughing. Sometimes when you're working really hard, the worst thing is to hear somebody else having fun. Because I'm not having fun. I'm scrambling. I'm working, and you're having fun. I'm not having fun. We can't have fun individually until we have fun together. Nobody says that, but sometimes we think that way. So there might be a Mary in your life who has fun before you're ready for her to have fun. Jesus, in that situation, I think, would say, listen, taking everything seriously isn't always the best thing to do. Maybe Mary has chosen joy. And maybe Martha should choose some joy. And this one felt a little weird to write. But maybe Martha thought Mary was flirting. There's a whole lot of ways that this could have happened. It says that some people explain the story that Mary was sitting at Jesus' feet. Well, that's sometimes a euphemism in ancient Near Eastern cultures. But maybe Mary was sitting too close to Jesus. Maybe Mary was so intrigued by what Jesus was teaching that she had her hand on his hand. Now, it could be that Martha was set off by this in particular, but maybe in the past, with previous visits, Mary had been inappropriate that way before. So Martha comes into the room and she has clear understandings about the way that we maintain distance in relationships. Maybe she has clear understandings around the propriety of sexuality, and Mary is just pushing those boundaries. Now, what would Jesus say there? Hey, listen, Mary's happy to be here. Mary is listening, and she's not worried about the rest of it, and maybe we don't need to worry about the rest of it. It's almost impossible that two people will draw the same lines of appropriateness around some of these issues. And it could be that Jesus is saying, hey, listen, let's worry about harm being done. There's no harm being done here. Let's not worry about protocol. Now, that doesn't mean that we can just do whatever, but there's sometimes needs to be an understanding that, yeah, we're going to see this issue differently, and seems like no harm is being done here. A common protocol in this time when a guest comes would be to wash their feet. Now, so maybe Mary didn't wash Jesus' feet. Martha walks in and sees Jesus' feet are still dirty. And she's upset about that. Because that's a thing that she was supposed to do. But then I thought, and this had never occurred to me before, maybe Jesus was washing Mary's feet. It's happened before, we know. We as Mennonites historically value foot washing as an act of service, as a symbolic remembrance of this story. So then maybe Jesus is washing Mary's feet after Mary had washed Jesus' feet. And Martha walks in and she's angry. That's not how this works. Jesus, you are the invited guest. How dare my sister ask you to wash her feet? Well, no, Jesus would have offered. So Martha could have been upset about this because there's an understanding that washing feet is something that is done by a servant. And maybe they didn't have a servant. Again, I'm sort of asking for your permission after the fact of speculating, guessing what might have been happening here. But I think it fits. If they didn't have a servant, oftentimes in family, the things that a servant would have done is done by the younger siblings. And so Mary is doing the important work, the thinking work of making the food, of decorating, doing all of that properly. And Mary is doing the servant work of washing Jesus' feet, of doing the dirty things that are embarrassing and humiliating. And Mary, in that space, is supposed to humble herself, but immediately Jesus doesn't want that. So, I'm guessing, but what if that's what happened here? What if Jesus is washing Mary's feet and Martha came in? And she thinks that Mary asked for it, but no, it was Jesus that offered. What if Jesus is saying to Martha, hey, listen, you want Mary to do the embarrassing work, the humiliating work, but we're not going to play that game today. We're not going to humiliate Mary. I'm lifting Mary up. I'm treating her as an equal. And Martha would be worried because if she's going to be an equal, then she's not going to listen to what I say anymore. That the house might not work the way that it was supposed to work anymore. So, would that be enough to get Martha angry? We can understand that Jesus would respond here. Jesus wants harmony in that household, but Jesus also wants equality. He wants people to be valued. And so he wants to lift Mary up. But Martha might have come in the room then and say, oh, washing feet is a special thing? Okay, well, then Mary should come with me to do kitchen things that are less special. Maybe I should do the foot washing if that's the special thing. So then Jesus is saying, yeah, pick one thing, right? Jesus wants Martha to pick one thing. She's distracted by so many tasks in the kitchen. Mary has chosen one thing. It seems that one thing is learning from Jesus. But maybe Mary has accepted where she's at, and Martha hasn't accepted that. Maybe Martha walked in the room and she sees that Jesus is elevating Mary by complimenting her, by valuing her stories, by washing her feet, and Martha wants to be lifted up. But Martha cannot be lifted up as long as she is trying to hold Mary down. And that's where a lot of us fit within our families. Within a lot of our human relationships. We feel the weight of disharmony. We feel the pain of division in our families. And we want to be lifted up. We want to be brought to a more peaceful setting, but we can't do that while we're holding other people down. Maybe Jesus was elevating Mary by listening to her questions. Even now, I initially went into university studying math. And in math lectures in university, you ask questions if you don't understand something. Right? You may as well, and people would do this. When you would put up your hand and the professor would call to you, you would say, I might not be understanding things properly, but can you explain that thing again? And then I switched into arts. I switched into religious studies and philosophy and psychology. And then people put up their hand because they had a moment of inspiration. And then the professor has to value that. I'm still more comfortable in math learning spaces than in arts learning spaces. But maybe that's what's happening here. A good student understands themselves to be less than the teacher. And here maybe Mary is saying, oh, but what about this? But I don't understand that one question. And Martha says, listen, Jesus is a teacher. Let him teach. Keep your mouth shut. But that's not how Mary wants to learn. I don't think Jesus rebuked Martha. And depending on how you read it, what words and ideas you emphasize, you might read it that way, or you might read a more sympathetic response from Jesus. I don't think Jesus was angry with her, was critical of her. But I think Jesus was trying to free Martha just like he was trying to free Mary. Because Martha came in the room distracted, frustrated, feeling undervalued. But that's how Mary felt, undervalued. That's why she was staying with Jesus, because in the company of Jesus, she was valued. So in your life, I want you to think about the ways that you might be Martha. That you might be determining a natural course of things, and this has to happen, and then this, and then this, and then after that we can have fun. And then after that we can enjoy each other's company. And then after that the visiting can happen. But first, those other things that are more important. Sometimes you're the Mary. You've been carrying a burden. You've found yourself in a role where you're undervalued, and all of a sudden there's a way out. There's somebody who's ready to lift you up. Who is that person? What are the burdens that you're dropping? How can you help other people remove those burdens from their life? Jesus explains to Martha that Mary has chosen one thing that is important. Martha's worrying about many things: the food, the table, the house, the smell, the decorations, the flowers, all of these things. Those are fantastic things. Jesus is going to have a great visit. The food is going to taste good. The house is well decorated. Everything is going to be where it's supposed to be. But Mary needs to choose what that one thing is. If, Martha's not doing those things for no reason. Martha is doing those things so that Jesus feels welcome. Martha is doing those things so that her guest is valued. Excuse me. Martha is doing good things, but in the midst of those good things, she gets her priorities wrong. It's not one thing, it's many things. But it can be one thing. Martha, if you want to be a good host, focus on that, and it'll be a good time. One thing. If running around to get the desserts ready right away, if that's going to interfere with the hosting experience, then let the desserts slide. Just worry about one thing. And everything will go better for Mary and Martha and Jesus if Martha focuses on the one thing. Some of us are good at focusing on the one thing. We have mantras, we have priorities, we have motivational posters, whatever it is. One thing. And that one thing can be worshiping Jesus. That one thing can be loving your family. What is your one thing? And focusing on that one thing might get the family going. The connecting going better. This is a story, like I said, from 2,000 years ago, but it can be a story for now. So in this story, I hope you find yourself. I hope you find yourself identifying with Mary or Martha, and in that process, I hope you find the words of Jesus to be reassuring. It isn't about following the rules. It isn't about protocol and reputation and hierarchy. One thing. Invite Jesus into your home. Invite Jesus into your family. And focus on one thing together.